Welcome to CPF Firewire, a podcast from California professional firefighters where we discuss a wide range of issues affecting firefighters, our unions, our families, and the communities we serve.
Hi, I'm Brian Rice. I'm the president of the California Professional Firefighters, and we're on the CPF Firewire. Joining me today is Brian Abney. He's a director emeritus with the Orange County Professional Firefighters, Local 3631. He's currently a business agent with OCPFA Local 3631, and a recently retired fire captain paramedic. Well, Brian, you've become really well-versed in workers' comp, and you're a critical resource for Orange County Firefighters Local 3631 and helping your members navigate that process. Brian, if you could just tell me a little bit about your background and what got you involved with being a workers' comp resource for Local 3631.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I'd like to say there was some grand master plan that this was all lined out, and but I happened into it. You know, I went to college prior to getting hired with Orange County Fire Authority, got a degree in athletic training, and then also got a degree in exercise science kinesiology. And so was a personal trainer and also a strength coach, so wellness was a big thing for me.
Okay.
I'd always planned on being a public servant. My dad's a retired police officer from the city of Santa Barbara, and my mom was an administrator for the high schools in the Santa Barbara city system. And so that was my destiny. I got hired with Orange County Fire Authority in 2005, and immediately after getting off probation, I started in our WeFit program, the Wellness and Fitness Initiative. So, you know, I got training. I had already had multiple personal training certificates, but I got the IAFF version of that. In 2007, I got hit by a vehicle while responding to a trip and fall at a four-way intersection. That was my first introduction into the work comp system. It actually went really well. I went off for the night, came back, did some physical therapy, continued to do work, and got a cortisone injection because it was all approved. And it didn't work, so I got a second opinion. Turns out I needed surgery. I was still working the entire time because I was released back to full duty, and I was actually able to literally schedule out my elective surgery, all covered under the work comp system. So I got my shoulder fixed. I had a foreign body, basically a piece of bone broke off by getting hit by the car and was jamming up my joint and my range of motion. So all fixed, everything was covered, great work comp experience, right? Fast forward to about 2020, I blew my ACL, my right ACL, on a structure fire. Slipped down some wet stairs and I felt the pop. And then, because I'm stubborn like most of us, I spent 3 months saying it's not broke and I'm gonna fix it myself, which just only did more damage to that knee. So I re-engaged with the work comp system. I did document it that first day that I did tear it. And I got in the system, saw the doctor, got my orthopedist, got my MRI. It went very well as well. I ended up being off for 364 days.
At this point in your career, Brian, you were at a point where your interaction was with the system and you were kind of learning as you go, or were you already pretty versed in the work comp system, or were you at a learn as you go stage?
So actually I was learning as I went.
Okay.
So I just had some good experiences with some orthopedic injuries. In my experience with the orthopedic injuries, and it happens on an incident and it's documented that day and everybody's there to see it, it gets covered. And you get approvals, you go off duty, you get your 4850 time, which is the labor code number, right? You go on IL, whatever we call it, right? And you start seeing the orthopedist, you get your physical therapy, you get your tests, you get surgery, and then you do your physical therapy, get back to work. So I wasn't engaged in the union work yet. Actually, I got engaged while I was still recovering from my ACL.
Okay.
So we had a position open up on the Local 3631 board for director, and I applied. And I was picked through an interview process because we were mid-cycle. We do two-year cycles.
An appointment.
Yep. And so I did that for a year. And then got reelected for the next 2 cycles. So I did a total of 5 years as a union director. So that's when my real work experience or real work comp experience started because, like I said, there was no plan from the beginning that I was going to be this work comp guy. But the guy that I replaced, he did our healthcare, Ryan Bishop, yeah. So our previous vice president, Ryan Bishop, he did our healthcare trust, and he did work comp. And so they said, here you go. And so for me, it fit in that wellness arena, the healthcare, the work comp. I was also engaged in our committee that managed our WeFit program with the department. And so I really started just taking over that wellness dojo, right? That's what I did. Eventually, I ended up bringing over the behavioral health as well. So I did all wellness. And I think it's all tied together anyways. The systems aren't that different when we look at private insurance, when we look at work comp insurance. It just depends on who's paying the bills. So yeah, I spent 5 years basically being the work comp liaison for our members when they had work comp issues.
And we were talking about that earlier, and you touched on some stuff that I thought was super important, and kind of that base of knowledge that you picked up, and you were talking about when to engage an attorney, when you can do things in the system yourself, but you also talked about the relationships and how important not just the labor management relationship is, but how important the union HR relationship is. And how did you kind of pick up where Ryan left off? You picked up on those relationships. How did you build a working relationship in the work comp arena with Orange County Fire? How did that go for you?
Yeah. So, I mean, you pretty much hit the nail on the head. So everything that I've done in the wellness, in the healthcare, the work comp arena for Local 361 members was all built on the backs of the members who came before us, those union leaders. And so Ryan was a big mentor of mine. And the way he did business was creating relationships. I think it's super important that we have all different facets of personalities in our union leadership. We need that pit bull. We need the charismatic politician. We also need the people working behind the scenes, making those relationships and having the important conversations where we can get things done behind closed doors, and we already know the outcome before we come out, right?
Right.
And so that was Ryan. And so I followed him that way. That really fit my personality. And so I started engaging with our risk manager at OCFA. I actually had her come to the union office and give me a class initially when I first picked it up in the first 6 months to just describe to me her side. And I think that's what the most important thing is. And that for me, that would be my challenge for union leadership today would be that if you don't have somebody, number one, who is their work comp liaison that can help hold hands for your members as they go through the process and understands what those steps are, what timeframes are, who to call, the whole process, right? I challenge the union leaders out there to go identify that person on your board. And then the second thing would be is create that relationship with your HR manager or your risk manager and really show them that, hey, we understand there's two sides to this, right? And, obviously HR and risk management, they're coming from executive side and they're coming from the politician side. We're coming from labor, right? But if you guys can both see that we're both doing the same job, we both care about our people getting back to work. This is not an adversarial relationship. We're not here trying to make people angry. We're trying to get people better.
There's a lot in common goals, whether you're an injured firefighter trying to get back to work or you're the comp system administrator. Mm-hmm. There are certain goals that we each want to have happen for each other. And you were one of the first people that really pointed that out to me, the way that you did, in that you talked about time frames, these are knowns, and there's certainly bad work comp administrators or third-party administrators. We all know that, but there are also good ones. But the thing that you pointed out, Brian, there's knowns here. And when you identify the knowns that it's the same for the administration as it is for labor, it changes things.
Sure. No, absolutely. So I think we can just get down to brass tacks. Labor cares about their members, their safety, and their health. right? And this is no negative on executive management because I think they have the same goals.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is they have politicians to answer to, and they care about dollars and cents. The great part about those two different opinions, if we understand them, is that if we get our members back to work faster through an expedited, appropriate process, then we are going to save the department millions of dollars in work comp expenses. And that's a budget item that they have to worry about every year. And so the fact, if we can just, like I said, agree on the fact that we want to save the department money by getting our people back to work faster. And really the biggest line item there is overtime. If you have a member off for 365 days, not only are you paying for that member's full year of salary and benefits, you're paying for somebody to work behind them for a full year at time and a half. So you're paying 2.5 times for one member.
Right.
That's an easy conversation to have, and it's in my opinion, one of the greatest ways to explain, hey, we can work on the same team. We can get what we want over here, health, safety, back to work faster. What you guys want over here, which is saving money, decreasing your premiums for work comp, all those kinds of things. And we can help manage that budget just by getting guys back to work, by getting them through the system faster.
As we were talking earlier, the one thing that you brought up that I thought was super interesting, Orange County Fire has their own healthcare trust.
True.
And go through what it's like, because you're involved in the healthcare trust too.
Correct.
And are there, we know that every department, whether it's a city, a county, a district, there are differences, but there are some commonalities in work comp. And what do you see, whether it's like CalPERS health insurance, which would be private insurance versus your own self-funded insurance trust, and workers' comp? There are certain things that are going to happen no matter what you have. And have you kind of identified some of those, and do you see some of them that could kind of take a little bit of the mystery out of, for some of the listeners that, might be sitting there going, I got a healthcare trust, how does this work?
Sure. Yeah, so I mean, insurance is insurance. The only difference between private insurance and work comp insurance is who's paying the bill for what issue, right? So obviously if you get hurt off duty, you go through private insurance. Fortunately, in our state, if you have an injury on duty through the scope and work of your job, work comp handles the bills. They're both insurance. They both have stakeholders they got to pay and answer to, right? And they're a business as well, right? And so there's a very big similarity there, right? They may not want to pay out these high dollar claims, whether it's private or whether it's work comp, right? So the biggest thing about that is that because they're the same, we can kind of utilize our personal experience if we don't have experience in work comp to understand what the work comp system is like. Obviously, there's this approval, right? And that's the biggest thing for work comp is getting approved. Once you get approved, you need to be your own advocate, right? So I like to tell the story, whether you're married and you have children, you have a wife, you have a partner, you have a mother, we all have mothers, fathers, right? But the point is, if they have an injury or they're sick and they're referred to a specialist, right? Are you going to be on the phone after a week of no contact from your private insurance carrier to make sure that your family member is getting the care they deserve, they need, that they're paying for?
Absolutely.
So as a member who gets hurt at work, why aren't we doing that for ourselves, right? Why aren't we being our own advocate and making phone calls to our adjuster, making phone calls to HR, making phone calls to our union liaison who does work comp to help get this process moving forward? And then also understanding, that's another thing too, is timeframes, right? So out in the private insurance world, because the medical system is so impacted, right? It doesn't change whether it's private insurance or work comp. It's going to take a couple of weeks for you to get to see your PCP or an orthopedist. It could take up to a month to get a surgery, right? Just on the private insurance side. It's just the same with work comp once you get that approval. So getting healthy from an injury doesn't change whether it's outside of work or on the job. That's what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, it was interesting that we were talking, and I hadn't really thought about it, but the timelines, because we all hear a lot, I filed and I didn't hear anything. It took this long to get it. And you were telling me a little bit earlier, you were talking about timelines and that many of the timelines are knowns. And if you're injured and you don't engage an advocate or an attorney, it's important that you know the timelines. And this would be a great one that you have somebody within the union structure, executive board, to be a liaison. That, you know, I call you and go, Brian, I blew out my knee. I've got to have surgery on my ACL. I've turned it all in, but nobody's called me. What happens next?
Right. No, absolutely. And, you know, in that case, for me, the way I deal with our members, because I have that relationship with risk management, is I get their work comp claim number, I get their date of injury, and I find out what the issue is. And I make a phone call directly to my risk manager, and I ask them to look it up. And she's gonna go into her computer. She may have an answer in 5 minutes on the phone while I'm waiting, or she'll say, I'll get back to you. And usually, within 72 hours of that phone call, the problem's fixed, and that member's getting a phone call from their adjuster or for their work comp carrier saying, hey, you're scheduled for this date, or here's the phone number to make the schedule, it's all approved. So that's the biggest thing. Once again, we go back to advocacy for yourself, right? You can't just sit and wait for somebody to do everything for you. Hold your hand through the process. The red carpet isn't going to be rolled out for you. I know that we're all heroes, and we all deserve the best medical care and the best treatment, the best pay, the best wages, the best working conditions, right? But right now, that's not how the system works, right? And so we actually have to be a part of that process if we want to get better and get back to work as soon as possible.
How important, so we're kind of using a lot of the orthopedic injuries as kind of our discussion point. Earlier, we were talking about presumptives and what they are, what they aren't, and what that can mean to a member. But then the other piece, I'm going to go a little bit before a presumptive. How important is a personal exposure record? How important to that is, how important is logging your exposures?
Sure.
When you have an injury or an illness, does it make a difference?
100%, 100%. So, you know, hopefully your department has some type of an exposure documenting system. We do at OCFA, and I utilize it for my entire 20 years prior to retiring. In my personal situation, and we'll talk about that later when we talk about my story, it was really important, and I think it was one of the major decision makers for getting an approval through our workers' comp carrier and getting the treatment and care I needed, and helped me through my disability retirement. So yeah, documenting, okay? Whether it is an acute orthopedic injury on scene of an incident or working out in the gym, you know, tripping over a 4-inch hose, it happens, right? Stepping wrong out of the rig, it happens. Document those exposures, those injury exposures. But then when we look at presumptives, and we'll go into a little bit after that real quick after this, but you look at presumptives, right? CPF has fought long and hard to continue to add presumptives to the list. We just got PTSI in 2020, right? Incredible work, right? And we just got to keep adding those. We are so lucky to be in this state and to have presumptive injuries. But the problem that I think most of our members have is they interpret the word presumptive as guaranteed.
Right.
But those aren't the same definition. All that does is change the burden of proof.
Exactly.
Okay? So if you have an injury on duty, the burden of proof is on you to prove that you tripped over that 4-inch hose for an orthopedic injury. But for our list of presumptives, the burden is on the department to prove that it wasn't caused by the scope of your work as a firefighter. And so that's different, right? And so that causes delays. That's also causes delays in cumulative trauma cases where you have multiple injuries that have gotten fixed, you get back to work, and all of a sudden you can't work anymore. Or you run out of your 5-year statute of limitations on your shoulder and it hurts again. That's gonna be a cumulative trauma. Well, the department has to prove that it wasn't your job that did that.
Right.
That's presumptive, but it's not guaranteed, and it's a process.
Anything that's not a presumptive, it can be a portion depending on what it was or how the injury happened.
In presumptive and cumulative trauma cases, your documentation of exposures is one of the most important things. 100%. So utilizing your department's exposure reporting system, using PER, the great thing about PER is you keep it on your phone with you all the time. So if you forgot, you don't have to be at your station computer to log that in. You don't have to rely on your fire captain to log that in for you or have access to the reporting system. You can do it anytime. And whether it's PTSI, cancer, any type of hazardous materials incidents, and even orthopedic incidents and structure fires, like all these different things that we go on, if you log in those exposures, you will always have a record for yourself so that in the event that you have to use it, it's there and you don't have to go back and try and go through records of incidents for 20 years. I mean, it's one of the most important things. And like I said, in my personal experience for my story, it made such a huge deal and made me feel so much more comfortable, and it was so much easier to get the approval because of my documentation.
That leads me, you had a very interesting perspective on, and what I want all the listeners to know, we're not here citing case law or making case law or you should do this or you should do that. There are a lot of commonalities with employers, and there's certainly a lot of commonalities within labor, but there's going to be unique and individual differences. But I appreciated your take on, and it's yours, and you have an experience in the system. And yes, I want to talk about it a little bit, but you talked about, I think if you're in this arena and these things have happened and you have a good relationship, you probably, in the following things, it may not be necessary to engage an attorney. But if you're in this arena, you probably at least need to have that initial consultation. I found your thoughts really helpful and really good. Would you mind sharing them?
Sure, absolutely. So, we're talking specifically about like on-incident orthopedic injuries, which is probably 70-80% of what happens to firefighters, right? We're industrial athletes, and we know we're going to get hurt. Once again, it's not if, but when, right?
Right.
And usually those cases get handled in an appropriate time frame. We get our people back to work. The presumptives, where the department has to disprove that it happened at work, that causes delays, right? And so any work comp case, a member can retain an attorney. And once again, that's their personal decision. And there's a lot of great work comp attorneys out there, especially in this state, that deal specifically with fire and LEO and first responders. And they know their job and they know it well.
Well, yes.
So, I'd be wrong if I didn't say that on any work comp claim, it'd be worth having a discussion with legal counsel. Once again, this is something that your union leader, who is your work comp liaison, can set up, have a relationship with. You may already have an attorney group under retainer for your union who has a work comp representative.
Right.
Have that conversation. Either that liaison has the conversation or the member goes direct and has that conversation. So at least you can get some legal advice. But for the most part, with orthopedic injuries, they work pretty well unless they're being contested by the department, by risk management, by the politicians, excuse me. I mean, obviously, if you're getting denials and contested, 100% you should seek legal advice.
Yeah.
But when it comes to presumptive and cumulative trauma, I 100% agree that you need to engage an attorney for at least a conversation. And when you have that conversation with the attorney, they're going to know all the background, especially if they specialize in fire and LEO. And they're going to know if you need them or you don't. And that's the conversation you need to have. Here's my issue. Here's when it started. Here's my symptoms. This is what my doctor says. And the question is do I need you or do I not? And if they're any type of a worthwhile, well-known, well-respected attorney with integrity, they're going to say, yes, you need me, or no, you don't.
Yeah, and a lot of that can be based on the working relationship between the local and the city, county, or special district workers' comp administrator. Mm-hmm. And that the advocate or the attorney may say, based on the work I've done with these folks in the past, you need to engage us.
Yeah.
And or they might say they're very good. You should see the following things. If any good thing goes awry, give us a call. Yep. But you should be fine. It's interesting how it all comes back to, and I can't stress this enough, relationships. And I've watched union presidents across the state that talk about our comp system works very, very well for us. And almost every single one of them had an executive board member dedicated to working with the membership on comp injuries, but more importantly, working with the work comp administrator to have that relationship established ahead of time. And I cannot stress that enough. Now is the time to build the relationship so that the things that are common that we both know are going to happen will happen with ease, and they will happen on a time schedule.
No, absolutely. And I mean, this is a great time to talk about how Local 361 has engaged with OCFA, not only by building that relationship, but by creating processes that actually cut out a lot of the red tape. So we retained the Ferrone Law Group, and John Ferrone did a great job several years ago. I think we started 2014. We created what's called the ADR process.
Many departments use those.
Yep.
Yeah.
So alternate dispute resolution, and that's an agreement between executive management and the labor group to speed up processes, create timelines, engage independent medical examiners that are mutually agreed upon. And this agreement can be different for every department who negotiates it with their executive management. But what it's done for us is it's sped up time to get MRIs. It's sped up time to get specialists. It created this process where if you file for a presumptive injury or a cumulative trauma, within 10 days, you will get a phone call from workers' compensation to schedule a independent medical examiner to do his medical evaluation and either approve or deny, and that's going to happen within 30 days. And then he has 30 days to provide his report. So basically, we just took a presumptive process to 2 months. Sometimes it takes a little longer depending on the delay in reports, but that's the goal, right? And so instead of waiting 6 months, 9 months to get an approval when you don't have this process in place, we've guaranteed that it's going to happen. And if it doesn't happen, I'm on the phone to risk management saying, what's the delay? What's going on? Because we have this agreement. Another thing that this ADR process has allowed us to do, and I sat on these meetings quarterly for the last 5 years, is we mutually agree upon the IMEs that we're using in the specialties where we need them. And I sit with the department's lawyer, the risk manager, John Ferrone, myself, and then the West Coast representative for our work comp carrier. And we all sit down and we say, okay, this IME is retired, this one's not working, here's a list, and we all agree. And so that way we're all on the same page to have these physicians who are actually making the approval denial decisions for our members through this process. So I encourage any union out there to not only create that relationship, but reach out to your other unions and see what processes. Call me directly. I can tell you how we did it, who we utilize, but anybody you know who has an ADR process, reach out to them, engage with your risk management, your executive management, have those conversations because it will speed up the process.
All goes back to the relationship.
100%.
I want to talk about what got you and I here. We were doing a field operation at 3631. I sat next to Brian probably 2 days before you retired out.
Yeah.
And we were talking about your process and your diagnosis, and I realized right away that I need to get Brian up to Sacramento, and we need to sit and have a talk about workers' compensation, injuries, treatment, PER, all of those things. You bring a perspective based on your own personal experience. And then for me, it was it was captivating to listen to you explain the situation and explain what happened, but explain the timelines, and they weren't a mystery to you. It's like you knew, being diagnosed with an illness, that's all an unknown. But when I sat and listened to you, it's like you knew the steps that were going to take place. And I sat and it blew me away that as complicating, as mysterious, as daunting, or as scary as this situation could be, you knew how the process was going to work and how it was going to apply to you. And do you mind telling that story?
I don't mind at all. And you're right. So having the experience not only personally through this process all the way out to disability retirement, right? From step one to the end. But also for dealing with our own members for the last 5 years being the liaison, I saw multiple different injuries, saw multiple different timelines, multiple different versions of the process as I helped them through it. So it gave me a really, really good insight and background on what I had to look forward to. It actually gave me a lot of comfort. So, you mentioned the anxiety or the stress that this could cause. Let's just put aside a career-ending diagnosis. But just going through the system can be stressful. Having an understanding what the process looks like made it so much easier for me. So 8 years ago, I had a chest x-ray, and there were some abnormalities, and this was through our yearly physical that the Union Healthcare Trust provides for us. And I blew it off. And then also part of our healthcare trust, we do Body Scan International.
Any symptoms or anything telling you something was wrong? Nothing.
Totally non-symptomatic.
Okay.
So about a year and a half later, I did Body Scan, which is the head to groin CT scan that our trust provides for our members, which is awesome. And they saw the same abnormalities. So I said, okay, I'll go get it checked out. So I did this all under private insurance because all that stuff's HIPAA, and this was all my own medical evaluations, right? So went to my primary care physician and got a referral to a pulmonologist and started seeing him every 6 months, did chest x-rays, chest CT, pulmonary function tests, and he followed me for a period of about 7 to 8 years. And still not symptomatic.
Passing a pulmonary function test, all that.
Everything was great, right? So once again, we go back to being industrial athletes. We get to work out on duty. I came from a sport background. I was a scholarship athlete at Cal State Northridge. I'd always worked out. I did triathlons in the past. So my cardiovascular capacity was very good, very good. And initially I was performing on the PFTs at like 110 to 120% of people in my age group. And so everything was great. And so we just followed it, right? It was fairly stable. And then at about year 8, my pulmonologist saw a change in my PFT that was significant enough that he was concerned and referred me to a specialist. So the specialist is in ILD, or which is interstitial lung disease. And to speed this up, I saw her April of 2024. In May of 2024, she gave me my diagnosis of pulmonary fibrosis, interstitial lung disease. And at that point, because I knew the system and because I knew this doesn't even fall under presumptive, right? There is no line on our list that says lung cancer, but not interstitial lung disease.
And at this point, this was not determined yet to be a workers' comp injury or an on-the-job injury?
No, this was all private at this point. This was all private. And so I was given this diagnosis. I had already called my lawyer a month before and said, hey, this is coming down the pipe. And he said, as soon as you get a diagnosis, we're going to file. And that's what I did. And so knowing how this process was going to progress, because we have the ADRs, we have IMEs, I knew that I was going to see the independent medical examiner within a month. And then by the second month, I should have a report. So because of that, I was workers' comp pending. And so I had, and I have for probably the last 10 or 15 years of my career, 3 months of sick and vacation saved up. And this is advice to our members, because you never know, right? You never know if you're going to get hurt off duty or you're going to get hurt on duty, right? But the on duty isn't a guaranteed approval. So having time in your bank, don't be one of those earn one, burn one guys, because your family might not get a check, right? Because we're all active. We like to do fun stuff. We are going to get hurt at work. So having 2 to 3 months in reserve so that you get a check while waiting for your approval, that was a huge thing that I always thought was important, and it literally paid off. I had no stress. I knew it was going to take 2 to 3 months to get approval. I had the time on the books. The check kept coming in, okay? So I got my approval. They retroed all my time back, all my sick and vacation back, right? And then I started getting my work comp pay. And then I was given a follow-up appointment with the IME in 6 months because he wanted to see if there was any change or if it was stabilized.
At what point did you bring in personal exposure reporting or your exposures?
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for reminding me. So when I saw the specialist in April of 24, I brought in all my exposures. I had 52 documented exposures over a 20-year career. And that was super important. Like I talked about earlier, that made the decision for my pulmonologist a lot easier, and she had the background to show, right? So now what she did was she had me do a couple blood tests to make sure that there wasn't any immunologic issue that caused it, that there wasn't a mold issue, and that there wasn't any type of any other issue that could have caused my scarring, fibrosis, and calcifications in my lungs. And with those 52 documented exposures, which I had confirmed asbestos, confirmed other hazardous materials, obviously every structure fire and wildland fire was documented. You don't know what's in those. And then I was also at the Paradise fire and the Montecito mudslide on Task Force 10 for the state, USAR, looking for deceased individuals. Who knows what was mixed up in that? So all of those together with the fact that nothing else could have caused this allowed my physician to go to her group of pulmonologists, present my case study and say, this, in my belief, is 100% work-related. They all agreed. She provided a report when she gave me my diagnosis May 24. And that's what I was able to, obviously when the request for medical records for the IME came, it was all there.
Do you think the outcome could have been different if you didn't have the exposures documented?
I would have had to fight a lot harder, 100%. It was pretty cut and dry for me. And, there's no guarantees.
Right.
But I felt like with 52 exposures, the symptoms I had that didn't start until several years into my career and then progressively got worse, it was obviously made worse by my job. And clearly with these documented exposures, it showed that I had exposures that could cause this. So I think it made the dots connect a lot quicker. And even though I had engaged an attorney, I think his job was a lot easier too.
But when you talked about the following things happened, I got this, and this many days later, this happened, then this many days later, that happened. Can you kind of talk to the listeners about that, how you had a very significant workers' comp health diagnosis, but you also knew what the system was going to do for you. It wasn't a mystery as you went forward.
Well, once again, having an understanding from the previous experiences of our members, I knew the time frames. I knew that I needed 2 to 3 months of sick and vacation so I could get a check. I knew once I got that, my sick and vacation time was going to get retro back. And then I could continue to see the physicians. I was going to follow up with that IME. And then, like I said, I knew from May of 24, I wasn't coming back. So now we're looking at, okay, I've got a document from not only my physician that states I can no longer be a firefighter, which is scary enough, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And it took me a few months to get my head around that. But I also have an independent medical examiner who works for our work comp carrier who states you can't come back to work. But we're gonna run this out and see if it stabilizes. But then what I knew was when I finally got my document from my second visit to the IME that gave me the term, which is permanent and stationary status, right? Which means that your injury has gotten better, as good as it will ever get, right? You're done, you're stabilized. Your shoulder's just as good as it is. Your lungs are just as good as it, whatever, right? So permanent and stationary status means it's not getting any better. I also knew, another term that they use is you've reached maximum medical improvement, which is tied to that permanent and stationary status. When you're given permanent and stationary status, you're given a disability rating, okay? And so I'm actually still working through that process with my IME and the final report. But I knew that was coming. So now my medical service order, which states my work release status, right? So there's 3 statuses, either full release, you can do your job. There is release with restrictions, right? You can do a job, but not the firefighter job. And then you also have total temporary disability. right? So I was always TTD. I wasn't coming back to work. But once again, I knew those terms. And so I saw the form for my work status. All right, he's TTD. Now, once I finally get my final report from the physician, the IME, that states I can no longer perform the functions of a firefighter, right? Then I knew that I was going to have to go to HR.
Right.
They're going to get it anyways. But once again, I have a relationship with risk management and HR. They knew it was coming. I'd already talked to them. Right. And, I'd explained the process. And so, I submitted that. It got submitted by our work comp carrier. And now we go into what's called the interactive process. And what that is basically, once you're told that you can't do the job anymore, is the department's required by statute to give you an option to have another job.
Yes.
Right? Usually administrative, right? You can't breathe smoke, you can't pull hose, you can't throw ladders, you can't swing an axe. It's going to be an administrative job if they have something available, right? If they don't, then they just determine, okay, you can't do the job of firefighter anymore, and we're going to file for disability employment for you. In my case, I was offered a few jobs if I qualified for them, and I decided after 20 years that I was good and that I was going to look for something else. And you're allowed to do that. You can deny their offer. It's no effect to your disability status. And so I declined their offer. So then they filed for retirement on my behalf as well as I did. And that was the process from start to finish. And it was very, very helpful, once again, in regards to the stress, the anxiety, the paycheck, all the things, right? The most important thing to firefighters is taking care of their family, making sure the lights go on, the food's on the table, you got a bed to sleep in, you got gas to get it back and forth to work, your kids are playing sports, all those things, right? Like, I knew how the financial thing was going to go. And that's another suggestion too, right? So, one of my things is that have 2 to 3 months of sick and vacation. Having a couple months of your budget in your savings is huge, once again. So now I'm filing for disability retirement. I filed March 28th. It takes 2 months to get your check from the retirement administrator, right? Because they usually pay 1 month in arrears. And it takes a month to get your information, right? So if I didn't have any savings, I don't have a check coming in either. So having 2 months of budget is helpful. So once again, because I knew this process, I was able to walk this thing out. And that's why it's so important to have a union leader who understands work comp and is a liaison for your members, because they're not going to have this whole process. The member isn't going to have this process in their head because almost 100% of the time that somebody gets into the work comp process as a firefighter, it's their first time.
Yeah.
It's their first rodeo. And they don't know what to expect. So I was very blessed. I knew exactly how it was going to march out. It marched out almost as perfect as I knew and had seen the system work out. Like I said, from beginning to end into disability. And I was prepared for it.
Brian, you just hit the key as I sit and listen, and you just told me your story a little bit more in depth. But what struck me over and over, you were prepared. Every union in the state of California should have a workers' comp liaison position, and that preparation it really struck me loud and clear. You were prepared, and that's that every firefighter, and I was a firefighter for 30 years. And every firefighter that I know that either had an injury, whether it was catastrophic, severe or minor, or an illness, the same thing, every single one of them had one question: when can I go back to work?
Yeah.
But when the shit hits the fan, we've got to know more than that, because it will it'll put us into a tailspin that is one more complicator to an injury or an illness diagnosis. So I appreciate your time, your candor on this. If there are a couple of points that you would like to leave the listeners with, what would you want people to know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. For the union leadership, once again, we've hit on this point multiple times. You need to have somebody designated as your work comp liaison. And that person needs to create a relationship with their risk management, executive management, and the decision makers for work comp. And just remember that we can we can separate hours, wages, and working conditions and health and safety for healthcare and work comp for our members. You don't have to be adversarial about it, because I think we all have the same goals, right? And even if the talking point is to save the department money and work comp, if that is the means to the ends to get your people back earlier, that's a great talking point, right? So, and then, once again, for the union leaders is, engage in the work comp carrier and see if you can create relationships there with the adjusters. Have risk management come and teach you about the process. Have HR come and teach you. Really, truly engage so that you can be that individual liaison, because we can't expect all of our members to understand the process as well as I do, as well as your union director will, those kinds of things, right? So that's for the union leadership. And then we also need to continue to press at the state level.
Yes, absolutely.
For all of our presumptives, and the processes. For the members, the biggest thing is you have to be your own advocate. And in doing so, you need to educate yourself. Now, if all of a sudden you have an injury and you didn't have time to educate yourself, then there's 3 people you need to call. You need to call your union, you need to call HR and risk management, and you need to find out who your work comp adjuster is and call them. And document, right? And when I say that, I mean, if you have a conversation with risk management or work comp, you need to follow that up with an email of your conversation. Okay, so you have it listed.
Build a diary.
Correct. And then we also talk about document. We're talking about your department's exposure report system and PER online, because OCFA's documentation system was very good. I was able to print up 20 years of firefighting documentation all the way back to 2005. That's not every department.
No.
They may not have had one until 2 years ago, right? So that's why you need to do PER as well, because that's your personal. And with those documents, I advise that you have a digital copy, you have one at the station in a file folder, one at home in a file folder. That way you have it when you need it. I needed it. It helped me so much. So, and then the last thing for the members, being prepared financially for a work comp or off-duty injury, because when it happens and the paycheck doesn't come in, it's not good. And that right there is so stressful for our members to try and figure out and navigate, especially when they don't know what the process looks like, right? So having 2 to 3 months of sick time in the bank, having 2 to 3 months of your budget in savings, so that's that rainy day fund. When it happens, you're ready for it. And if it's a work injury and it gets approved, the good news is you get retroed. You get your time back and you get your savings back. So you're whole, right? If you get hurt off duty, well, then you were just prepared. You didn't know it was going to happen. That's why they call them accidents. Yeah. But now your family is still whole when you get back to work. And then you can work some overtimes and clean it up. You know what I mean? So that's my advice for the union leadership and the members. Truly, I'm passionate about this. Like I said, wellness is my thing, healthcare, work comp, behavioral health, and they're all tied together. And so, it's super important for me to be able to educate our union members on all 3 of these things. And it's the greatest honor I've ever had, was to serve the members that serve the communities, and to be able to affect a person and their family's life with a phone call, because I was able to make a relationship and understand a process. So that's why I love doing what I do so much. It gives me great satisfaction, way more than getting a 3% raise on the check. So,
Brian, for the listeners today, as we started this, today's the anniversary of the loss of the Granite Mountain Hotshots, the 19. And so, we carry on this podcast segment in their memory and their honor. Joining me today was retired Captain Paramedic Brian Abney from the Orange County Fire Authority. Brian, just a wealth of knowledge. Thank you so much for being willing to share. And I have a feeling we'll be doing another one of these at some point in the future. Thank you.
I'm looking forward to it. It was my pleasure.